Good morning, everybody. We're going to talk today about how to export a file to get it ready for 3D printing from either TinkerCAD or Fusion 360. And there's a couple of different things I want you to keep in mind when you're getting a file ready to submit. So the first is that if you look on our print this file turn-in place on Canvas, I listed the build dimensions of the printer that we'll be using. It's a FlashForge Creator Pro. And that's its dimensions in millimeters. So you can't send me anything that won't fit in that space or I won't be able to print it. The things that I want you to keep in mind when you're getting a file ready to export are it should be the correct size. So you should send it the size you want it printed. I'm not going to rescale it for you because I don't know what you want. You need to size it correctly before you export it. Second, oriented the way you want it. I'm going to talk about that, which way it's pointing. And then not have sections that are too small to print, so too thin. For example, the filament that comes out of the machine can only get so narrow. If you have a part that's really, really tiny, it's possible the 3D printer software won't even see that there's supposed to be something there because it's too narrow. So I'll look at all of those examples. First, we'll look at TinkerCAD. So here is a part. It is a coupler part. It's made for attaching a large tube of toothpaste to a tiny tube of toothpaste so you can refill your travel size containers. But here are the few things that I want you to think about. What way should I print this? Should I print it like this? If I do print it like this, it's going to fill in the whole center here with support material. And it's going to be really hard to get all that support material out cleanly and smooth out the kind of screw ridges there enough to actually let it work. And it's also just kind of a waste. So instead, I would look at this part and say, you know what? I think that there is a better way to go. I bet if I click and I hover over the rotate and I rotate it 90 degrees, now the printer will start down here and work its way up, but it won't fill this entire center section with support material because it won't need it. Okay, so the second thing to think about here is now this is not on the platform. You can see that it kind of sticks through the platform, and that's not great. So we would click on this. TinkerCAD has a nice little shortcut for this one. If you just press the letter D, it will drop it to the surface. Ta-da, just like that. Okay, so now this part is at least oriented correctly. I don't see any sections that are too small to print or too thin, so it is ready to export, assuming it's the size we want it, and in this case it is. So if that's the case, we would come over to export over here. Export, download, and 3D print is what it says when you hover over it. So if you click there, you can choose either everything in the whole design or just the selected shape. In this case, I just want the selected shape. I just want that coupling piece. And then STL is the type of file, and it says that in the print this file section to STL file. So if I click STL file, it will download over here in just a moment. It's preparing. So it will download a file that has the ending, there it is, .stl, and that is the file that I want you to submit to print this file so I can get it printed. And I'll take pictures and send it back to you. And then those will be available for pickup when school reopens. Okay, so that one was pretty straightforward. Let's look at maybe one that isn't as straightforward. So last week, I looked at designing a cookie cutter. I didn't design this one. I went and borrowed this one online just so I could show you this print export stuff. So right now, it is really big. I pulled out the ruler so that we can see it's really big. It's 282 millimeters by 219 millimeters. That's way too big. That's bigger even than my whole print bed. But it is easier sometimes to be able to visualize that. So I want to show you a really good way in TinkerCAD to visualize your build space. If we go down here to Edit Grid, you can actually set the dimensions of your grid right here. So if I know that 225, oops, 225 is the width dimension, and I think it was 145, is that true? Yeah, is the length dimension. Now when I say update grid, I'll move this out of the way, that is the build space that I have to work in. I'm gonna move this coupler out of the way. Okay, so now this guy, clearly too big for my build space. So I want to make it small enough so that it can print correctly. So I am going to shrink it down to size. If I hold Shift, then when I go to shrink, it will shift in proportion. All right, that's looking a lot better. If we look 54 millimeters this way, 69 this way, and 17 this way. It's pretty close to right. The other thing that I want to check is these walls. You see these walls? I want to make sure they're not too thin. And there's a couple of ways to do that depending on what software we're in. Here I can just kind of eyeball and look, and it looks to me like those are maybe 2 millimeters thick based on the grid behind them. But one good way to check is going to be to bring out a box, and I'm going to make it 2 millimeters thick. And now if I compare these, okay, so it looks like my wall currently is more like 1.5, which is a little thin for a 3D printer to pull off well. So maybe I will make this a little bit bigger again and then see how we're looking. A little closer. This would be close enough that I would at least try and print it, especially because these walls are supposed to be really thin in order to cut through that cookie dough well. So if this was ready, the other things that I want to think about are how it should print. It happens that this is a pretty good way to print it. It's going to have that flat grip base on the bottom and then the walls that go up from there. So if I had designed it instead like this, and I was getting ready to print, everywhere under this ridge would require support material. That would be a lot of support material, and I would not want to try and print it that way. So I would expect that you would flip it over and send it to me in this orientation. Okay, so once again, if I am ready, I'm going to click Export. I do not want everything in the design. Oh, but I forgot to click on it first. Okay, so this is all I want to export. And I just want the selected shape, and I'll hit STL, and it will download that to my computer. If you do have a shape, a print file that you need more than one thing printed, this would not be a good example. I would like to print these separately, but if you had a thing that you needed more than one thing to print, we would just not click on anything, go to export, and say everything in the design. So now when I export this, it's going to take both shapes together. You do need to make sure that they have a little bit of space in between them, but we would not want to space them out like this. This will just make your whole print take longer. And is not ideal. In general, it's fine to send me multiple files and say that you need both printed, but not pre-combine them yourself, because that just means I can arrange them in the print bed as best I can. And so in general, I would prefer that you send one item per file. Okay, so now I've got some downloads. That's great. Those are looking pretty good. Let's go look at a similar set of steps in Fusion 360. So I brought in the same two objects to Fusion 360 for us to take a look at. Okay, there we go. And let's see, maybe I will move these guys around a little bit. You can do the same kind of rotating and resizing that we already know how to do in Fusion. Refer back to those how-to videos if you don't remember. But the exporting is the part that I want to be able to show you. So for example, if this is the piece that I would like to export, I will go and select it. It is all one body. Go down to bodies, one body. And I will go to tools. Usually we start on solid. I will go up to tools, over to make, 3D print. So that brings up this little 3D print pop-up over here. The selection is going to be this part. You can see it turns blue. It says that it is selected, just like other commands. Under output, I'm going to uncheck send to 3D print utility because I just want an STL file. I'm not going to do my printing straight from Fusion. And then if you say OK, it will bring up a place to save it. So this thing was a coupler. It's going to save it as an STL file and save. Okay, and that is the file that you can turn into the print this file assignment. Similarly, you could do it for this one, tools, make, 3D print, have that one selected, don't send to 3D print utility, say okay. This one is a cookie cutter, save, and that one's saved. What doesn't work is to hit make and 3D print and try and do two things at once. It's just not, it's not going to let you. It will pick one or the other, but not both. So if you do have a thing where you need to export multiple bodies into one file, and this might be because you have assembled them, but you haven't joined them completely. In this case, that's okay. So how we do that is you go up to the File menu, down to Export, and here under Type, STL file is all the way down at the bottom. Now this will take everything in your design and collapse it into one STL file, one print file. So make sure that the only things that are in that file are things that you want printed. If you have leftover stray parts, make sure you get rid of those before you do this export. And then we say export. And that's it. I'm going to show how it looks in the printing software. So the Fusion 360 export does take a little while. You'll get this job status window that pops up. That's because the way Fusion is handling it is doing it via the cloud. So it's actually looking at your cloud file and doing the conversion there and then sending it back to you. So this one takes a little while, but it should be fine. All right, so we're going to take a look at Flash Print, which is our printing software, and what I see when I'm getting a file ready to print. So this is our build area. If I hit load, I can go find one of the, doesn't really matter which one we do, one of the files that we got ready. I'm going to say open. And there is the coupler. So I can do things like move it around. I can rotate and scale in here, but I will not be doing that because you are going to make sure that it is scaled appropriately and rotated correctly for the way you want it printed before you send me the file. Okay, and then if it needs support, I can do that in here. I can hit supports and auto supports, or I can put in some particular ones if I think it doesn't put in enough. But this one won't need very many, which is good. That is the point. We would like to not waste more material than we need to. And then when it's ready, I just hit print, and I can change things like the speed and the temperature and the resolution. So if you want this to just be a test print, you can let me know that in your file upload, and I will print it on low. Standard is kind of our usual. If there's a particular reason you think it needs to be printed on high, you can let me know and I will take it under advisement. Fill density too, by default, we're at about 15%. If you want it hollow, so 0 infill, or you want it to be more dense for some reason, be sure to let me know before I print your file. So in that print file, put in comments about anything in particular you need, like the print resolution or the fill density. And that's about it. So I could take this one out. Let me show you what it looks like when we do 2 at once. So the good and the bad, right, is that these are already set up to print together. But if I decide that I want to move this piece and not the other one, this file is not set up to do that. So in general, I would prefer that you send your pieces separately and I can assemble them in here like this instead. I can get rid of this one and I could bring in the coupler that we already had and the cookie cutter. And I could then treat these as separate objects. I can even still print them together, but I could, you know, rearrange them in whatever way made the most sense. All right, I think that is our essentials for today. So we looked at how to export from TinkerCAD and from Fusion 360 to get an STL file ready for printing. Keep an eye on how your object is oriented, so which part is down. Keep an eye on the correct sizing and make sure you don't have any walls that are too thin to print. And then that should be enough to get us started. When you have a file ready to print, you're going to go ahead and submit it here to print this file. Include in your comments those things like resolution, fill density, anything like that. Okay? And if you have questions, just let me know.